Hello there. So to celebrate 20K subscribers, I wanted to say thank you to you guys by doing a Q&A video answering your burning questions about portfolio projects, standing on the job market, and transitioning into your first data analytics job. So thank you guys so much for your support on this channel since I started it a year ago. We're gonna be answering questions like, how do I know if my portfolio projects are good enough? Where do I even get started with my analysis? How do I approach coffee chats? And how should I think about my resume if I'm transitioning into a data job? I also wanted to give you a heads up. We're going to be giving away 2 spots to the self-paced course that I'm launching later this month, which is actually an adapted version of my live cohort. So many people wanted to be a part of live cohorts, but it's limited to just 25 to 30 spots. So we wanted to make this program more accessible to you guys, especially people all around the world. So if you want to enter this giveaway, all you have to do is sign up for my newsletter below and leave a comment about why you would like to be a part of our self-paced program, which is also going to include regular feedback sessions live with me. And then we will pick 2 winners and I will announce them in the next video. If you're new here, I'm Christine. I'm a former data director and a hiring manager who now helps people transition into data analytics by learning to think, speak, and operate like the top 1% of analysts who get hired. So if that sounds helpful to you, then make sure to subscribe and let's dive into our questions. So this first question is from Moses. How can we identify the right questions about a data set? So getting a data set and starting with data exploration, I get overwhelmed and struggled to know where to start and what to do. Moses, I hear you. This is one of the most common questions and challenges of aspiring data analysts. And what I find is that when people are bumping into this as an obstacle, it's actually because they're missing something really critical, which is business context and business understanding. So if you think about what a successful analyst does, is that they tell the story in the numbers and they tie those insights to what would be helpful to stakeholders. So it's hard to know what questions to start with if you don't actually have an understanding of business models, KPIs, and stakeholders and team structures. So before you even dive into a project, I recommend doing some basic research on different business concepts, like what are the different kinds of business models out there? What are the main metrics that each of those business models cares about? And also what kind of stakeholders care about those kinds of metrics? So for example, if you have a data set that has e-commerce data, then you want to learn a little bit about how e-commerce companies work. And most companies within each industry will track similar metrics. When you know what those top metrics are, you can then start to formulate some initial questions. I'll tell you right now that lots of stakeholder questions, no matter what industry you're working in, they follow the same structure. It's just that the metric is different. So for example, a stakeholder in finance might ask, what are overall trends in sales or revenue? Another stakeholder in marketing might ask, what were the dips or main drivers of marketing ROI? Or what were the trends in marketing ROI or LTV the last few months? So these initial exploration questions actually usually follow the same structure. It's like, what were the initial trends in this? Why did something go up or down? What are the main drivers of this? Given the performance in this metric in the past, what do we think will happen in the future, right? And we're just switching that metric in and out. So my suggestion, when you get a data set, first, you want to make sure the data set is actually relevant to companies. I see a lot of projects that focus on what I call vanity metrics, and those are just pretty metrics. They're just metrics that don't actually have any business values. So for example, let's say you have a data set that shows all the different kinds of shots that a tennis player can make, and you're doing analysis on this. That probably is not going to directly affect a company's bottom line. The kind of data sets that you want to work with are data sets that either contain financial values, marketing values, product values, operational values, efficiency values. Those are things that companies usually are looking at, no matter what industry you're working in. So once you have this data set, research the business model, understand those top 5 metrics, and formulate these kinds of questions for those top 5 metrics. I would also suggest using ChatGPT here to ideate what are some key stakeholder questions. Then you can just pick 1 or 2 questions to focus on. A portfolio project is going to be way more valuable if you deep dive into one question and come up with some pretty meaningful insights about that one question than if you look at like 5 to 10 questions and only have some really superficial observations to share. Okay, our second question, Prologue Pulse asks, I find myself in a loop of exploring the data set to answer one business question. When do I say, now this is finally the insights I'm looking for, and how do you know what level of granularity is enough? Well, first thing, I want to say that I think it's a really common misconception that the data analyst job is to come up with end-all, be-all, conclusive answers about why something happened or what someone should actually do. Our job as data analysts typically is not to draw very concrete conclusions and have 100% certainty about certain hypotheses before sharing with other people. Actually, our job is more so to be a guide, to report what we're seeing in the numbers, to help people translate what's happening in the values and interpret it in their language, and help them think through the different options based on what we're seeing in the numbers. So for example, an exploratory project about trying to understand a dip in sales might first start out with you slicing the sales metric by a bunch of different dimensions. So region or customer age or product, and finding if there are certain areas that had a bigger dip than others. Then surfacing that to a stakeholder, and then that stakeholder would bring in more business context and say something like, oh, right, I remember now we actually ran a marketing campaign that might be related to this, or we took away a certain product in this region that might be related to this. And so your job as a data analyst is not to get to the bottom of something, but more so for you to explain what you're seeing in the values, and then for the stakeholders to help you interpret why that might actually be. I think one of the most common mistakes that early career analysts make in their projects is they just keep going in their analysis. They just rabbit hole for days, continuing to go into the analysis, continuing to look at more dimensions, more metrics, not realizing that even a pivot table contains a lot of helpful insights, and that your job is not to slice and dice the data until the end of time, but rather to look at those numbers and put down in plain language what it is that you're seeing. Okay, Manuel asks, how can I manage to create robust analysis when I have a high number of variables, 40 to 50? And how do I keep my visualizations uncluttered and understandable at the same time? When you have this many variables, it actually points to a problem that happened before you even got started in this project, which is that if we're doing an analysis project where we're trying to understand the relationships between different metrics or variables, or the trends in different variables, is that we didn't narrow in on which variables were most important to begin with. And this actually has to do with problem framing, knowing how to then translate that business problem into a specific set of questions. If you're going to be analyzing a data set with 40 to 50 variables with no goal in mind, it reasonably is going to lead you to analysis paralysis. When you get a new data set, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what are the most important metrics here, given the business model and the domain knowledge that I'm working with? And so you shouldn't have 40 or 50 variables that you're looking at when you're doing exploratory analysis. You should start out with like 3 to 5. I would first make a hypothesis about what variables I think are most relevant to the business, and then I would look into those specific variables. And naturally, my analysis and my visualizations wouldn't be very cluttered because I already narrowed in on what's most important. Okay, Ramona asks, can things always be optimized using data, or are there situations where you use data to walk away from things that don't have traction, or they're good products with bad timing? Are we ever hyper-optimizing? So this is a very good philosophical question about, can data actually really solve everything? And the answer is definitely no. And most of the time, we're not, as I mentioned, even using data to get to very, very conclusive answers. We're using it to guide the direction of certain decisions and to make more refined and informed hypotheses. But it is totally true that sometimes on the job, stakeholders will hyper-optimize. I remember there was one company I was working at where we had just launched a new kind of pricing. And there was a lot of attention on our reports that were running live to see, is this new pricing doing well? And one day it would do well, one day it would do badly, another day it would do well, and it was very volatile. So it's hard to draw conclusions from that. And so then our job as a data analyst wasn't to say, yes, the new pricing scheme is doing well, let's continue it now and forever. It was more so to say, this data is actually still really fresh. We probably need to give it at least a few weeks for it to even level out to the realistic trend. So you can see why data analysts are not going to be replaced by AI. Yes, this like bottom line technical stuff of like writing basic SQL, doing data cleaning in Excel, that will gladly get taken care of by AI. I'm super happy to let that stuff go. But it's gonna be much more focused on how do you communicate what is happening in the data? How do you translate that to people? Because they're not going to be as in the weeds as you are. So Pratham asks, if you were hiring someone for an entry-level position or internship, what qualities would you look for beyond technical skills that would make a candidate stand out? I actually just did a Q&A session with students in my live cohort featuring some more experienced people in the industry, a senior director and 2 senior analysts who also now hire data analysts. And we all agreed on what these 3 qualities are. So the first one is insatiable curiosity. If you have insatiable curiosity, it means that naturally you're going to learn a lot faster. You're going to be a lot more coachable. You're going to be able to understand your part and your work and how it fits into the bigger picture. And you're going to be able to get the domain knowledge and the business context also a lot faster. This is something that I teach actually in the self-paced course that we're going to be launching, that it's going to show you how do you ask questions that actually make you stand out and makes really good use of that end of the interview to showcase this personality trait. So the second thing is structured communication and confident communication. Like I said, AI is going to start being able to do low-level technical tasks, and we should all be happy about that because I don't think anyone wants to be a SQL monkey. But what this means is that the job is actually evolving. It's shifting to be much more focused on people who not just sit at their computer all day and write queries all day, but they take those queries, they can explain it to other people, and on the spot, they can really translate what's happening and help someone who is not as technical understand that story. And then the third trait is people skills. This is actually related to the first 2 traits, and I will say that I think that this is just becoming more and more important these days than it ever was before, because a lot of the job is actually interacting with people, is being in meetings with stakeholders, empathizing with them, understanding what they actually need, what their goals are. And so data analysts, a lot of times, they're almost like a therapist. Like they're the ones who have to ask a lot of questions to understand what is really on the stakeholder's mind and how would they best help them. Okay, so Sandrine asks, what would you recommend as the best type of portfolio project for someone who's trying to land their first data job? Should I focus on something business-like or just show technical skills? If it is a business-oriented project, it naturally will involve technical skills. And if it's a strong technical project, it naturally will involve business questions. But high level, what I'll say is hiring managers are basically taking a 30-second glance at your project to understand whether you can bring direct value to their team, which usually has nothing to do with writing really complex SQL or making really fancy visualizations, but rather in showing stakeholder ready work. And so you always want to work with a data set that actually has those core business metrics so that the questions that you surface, the insights that you surface are naturally business relevant. A portfolio project with recommendations that are specific to a team, so for example, the finance team, the operations team, or product team, in my eyes is always going to stand out more than a portfolio project that uses really rigorous technical skills but doesn't have any business relevance. That, I will just caveat that and say, if you're applying to an academic role or a research role or a lab role that has very specific domain knowledge where they want to see a high level of technical rigor, but they don't care about business metrics, then that's probably the exception. But by and large, for companies that you're applying to in tech, product, operations, energy, education, like all of the different companies that really hire data analysts, they're going to want to see business relevance and then technical skills second. How do you balance learning tools like SQL, Python, Tableau? It feels like there's always more to learn. How do you know when you're ready? You never really know when you're ready. Even when I was working as a director in data, there was always more to learn. Like you never get to the point where you feel like, okay, I know everything. So just accept the fact that your job is not to know everything. Your job is actually to learn the foundational skills that are going to translate directly to the job that you're aiming for. So the first thing to do is to set a clear North Star for the kind of role, the flavor of the data role that you're going for. And that flavor of the role should have something to do with an area where you stand out, whether it's your domain knowledge, whether it's your geographic location, whether it's a personal interest or a passion of yours. You first need to identify what is the thing in your narrative or your story that stands out for a specific kind of data role, and what do those specific data roles actually ask for. Then you can start to identify what are the foundational gaps in what you need to know before you're a qualified fit for that position. For example, with tools like Excel, SQL, and Tableau, I actually talk about the specific level of skill that you should have in each one. I think it's in my strategic roadmap video, so I'll put that over here somewhere so that you guys can watch that after this one if you want to see what are the actual functions that I should know for each of these main components. And after you do some projects on your own, you want to put yourself in an environment where you're using these tools in a more real setting with real people, whether that's through volunteering, whether that's through some kind of freelance or contract thing or free internship that you're doing. That experience is going to significantly uplevel your understanding of whether or not you're ready. So Sandrine also asks, how technical do interviews for junior data roles usually get? What should I be ready for in terms of questions or tasks? In data analyst jobs, there's usually two different kinds of technical tests that you might see. One is the live SQL interview, which tends to be the scariest sometimes because it's hard to write SQL with someone watching your back. And then the second is the take-home assessment, where you're going to be given a prompt and then you'll have like 2 days to a week to actually finish it. So with the live SQL assessment, this is where you would probably get a few questions in SQL that is involving things like joins, window functions, maybe a CTE here and there, and they're actually going to ask you to code it live. So this can be very nerve-wracking, especially if you've never really done SQL on the job, because it's pretty hard to write code when you're really nervous. So I actually teach something called the 3 C's framework, which stands for clarify, communicate, and code. And so it's something that we teach in our live program, and we're going to be teaching in our self-paced course as well. And the main thing with the live technical interviews is they want to see your thought process. They do not just want to see perfect code. So if you can explain your logic very clearly and you can show that kind of fluency with SQL, even if you don't get all the answers right, you will probably still pass that interview. For the take-home assessment, now these take-home assessments these days, they can be pretty hard. The assessments that I've seen my students get usually are some open-ended exploratory analysis. The reason why it's very difficult is because usually you're given a data set and not many instructions. So the instructions are usually something like surface some insights and recommendations, which is something that we practice a lot in the live cohort and in the self-paced course. And here they want to see how you take a really ambiguous question, distill it down into the most important metrics, the most important dimensions, then surface insights and come up with recommendations for their team. So it's usually a mix of data cleaning, analysis, and maybe some kind of presentation where you can use tools like Excel and SQL. So the real value of a portfolio project, for example, is not really in having something on your GitHub that you can then like wave around to people and be like, hey, look, I can do the job. The real value of the portfolio project is actually really good practice for a take-home assessment. Another question that we have here from Sandrine, when applying for data jobs, how do you stand out if you haven't had much experience yet? Is it okay to apply even if you don't meet 100% of the requirements? The question is, when is it worth your time and effort? First of all, when you are applying to jobs in data right now, because the market is quite competitive, you do have people who have many years of experience applying into early career roles, which is why what hiring managers are actually looking for, the bar has kind of raised in terms of the soft skills that they're looking at. But generally, I recommend applying to jobs where you can check off 70% of the things in the actual job description. If you cannot meet 70% of the requirements of a job, and you're not really finding many jobs that actually suit you, then that points to the fact that you probably need to build up more experience. It doesn't really make sense to continuously apply if your resume doesn't really have a lot of data relevant experience, because that time and energy could be used to build up real-world experience that will then help you get the job. If we were to summarize our experience in a resume, how can we summarize all the details with minimum information, but also showcasing the impact of the project? Can you share any structure to follow, or can you make a video regarding this? That would be super helpful. So the framework that we use in the program is called the MINDS framework. It stands for metrics, insights, narrative, design, and skills. And those components, if you have that, it will make your resume well suited for data jobs. In terms of packing all the information in, the thing you need to consider is that hiring managers and recruiters, again, they're scanning your resume in like 30 seconds. And what they do is they literally look at the job title, they look at the tenure for each of those job titles, and then they scan like the first bullets within each section. And they immediately get a sense, does this person use the tools that we use? Does this person work with the same stakeholders? Do they look at the same metrics that we look at? So there's a few things that you should be doing in your resume. Then within each section, there's an order that you should follow. the most data relevant. So the most technically rigorous, the data projects that look at the most common metrics, those should be at the top of each section. And then within each bullet, you should be front loading the business metric and the tools. So the overall idea here is that you're not trying to share everything that you've done over the past 5 years. You're just trying to show the most data relevant experience, tools, and metrics that you've looked at, so that your resume does not have the story that says, hey, I've done a bunch of different jobs and now I want to be a data analyst. The story that comes across is actually, I have a bunch of different experiences that relate to data analytics in this way, and now I'm excited to transition and formalize this data experience in my next data role. Okay, Andrea asks, as someone transitioning into data and marketing analytics from marketing background, I'm building a portfolio of projects and currently considering whether to pursue a certification like Google's or IBM's. From your experience, how much weight do certifications actually carry compared to strong project work? And are there cases where certifications really make a difference in the hiring process? Certifications carry almost no weight, especially when it comes to the very basic certifications. So the Google Data Analyst certification, the IBM data certification, those, they not only carry zero weight, I'm just gonna be very real with you guys, sometimes they can actually work to your detriment. If you put them on your resume, if you have them on your LinkedIn, it will make you look very self-learned. And in a job market where people are approaching jobs with real-world experience, they are going to dilute the effectiveness of your application. So do not put those certifications on your application. The only time that it makes a difference is if you're doing a certification in a very specific tool or software that that company values and wants you to have a certification in. So for example, if you're a data analyst and you did the DBT certification and you actually have strong data engineering experience, that actually helps you stand out. So another one is like if you have a Tableau certification or a Looker development certification, then it can help you. But never put the more generic certifications on your resume. You not only need to have strong portfolio project work, but you should have more ideally real-world experience. So Andrea, you already have marketing analytics experience. I would actually focus your resume much more on the marketing tools you've used, the marketing metrics, the marketing insights, and marketing stakeholders that you have worked with, and explain and translate that to some of the data keywords that you see in data job descriptions, rather than talking about certifications. So he asks, what are some actionable strategies to get past the job application black hole, especially when you're applying online and not hearing back? Okay, when it comes to applying to jobs, if you think about it, there's 3 levers that you can pull. It's the resume that you have, the jobs that you're applying to, and how you're applying to them, right? Those are the 3 main things that you have in your control at all times. So for the resume, like I mentioned, check out the Minds framework and consider signing up for my self-paced course, which is going to walk you step by step through creating a standout resume. Then the second thing is the jobs that you're actually applying to. Now, a lot of times people will have a generic resume and they apply to generic data analyst positions, and that's just not really going to help you stand out. Instead, you should be much more targeted with your approach. So for example, Andrea from the last question should be applying to marketing analytics roles or marketing companies that need a data analyst if this is her first job in data, because that jump will be a lot easier than transitioning fully from a random industry, a random city, and a place where you don't have any domain knowledge. Of course, you can make that transition, but I'm just saying leveraging that existing domain knowledge to match yourself and target yourself to specific jobs is just going to give you a lot more interviews. And then when it comes to applying, so these days, networking is going to go way farther than cold applying. I recommend actually doing half of your applications through some form of networking, so value-driven networking. Also something we talk about in my self-paced course, but there's a video that we'll put here that talks about how to approach people on LinkedIn with a strong networking message. And so focus more on networking, especially if you're transitioning. Do not go the cold application route, because that is where people usually end up in the black hole, and that's not what we want. And then our last question from Sully is, how do you recommend approaching someone for a coffee chat, especially if you're just getting started and have never done one before? So this is a really good question, especially since many of my students actually find opportunities, whether it's a volunteering opportunity or an actual paid opportunity, through coffee chats. Your goal should actually be to learn realistically what the job actually looks like and how you can bring value to a team. So then just approach them with curiosity. Ask them, what is their day-to-day job like? What do they see about data analytics that they find challenging or that they really enjoy? What do they think makes someone stand out on their data analytics team? Where do they they think that their data team could use some extra help? And just try to get to know the realities of that person's job a little bit and pay attention to the words that they use. Pay attention to the vocabulary and the terminology and the keywords that they use to explain their projects. And the last thing I'll say here when it comes to networking is don't be shy. Just start putting yourself out there. I see this over and over again where students are first very resistant to this idea of networking. They're like, it feels so cringy. I don't want to put myself out there. I feel like I'm bothering people. But you would be surprised, number one, how much people do want to talk about themselves and want to share. You won't get a response from everyone, but the person that you do get a response for could really change your outlook and perspective on working in data in a good way. So I hope this Q&A was helpful. Thank you guys so much for all of your questions. Keep sending those questions along my way. I'm going to be doing another Q&A at some point when we reach another milestone. And if you want first dibs on the self-paced program that I'm releasing later this month, we're limiting it to just 30 people as our initial founding circle. So sign up for the newsletter below. And if you want to be part of the giveaway, leave a comment about why you want to be a part of the self-paced program. We'll pick 2 people and announce it in a future video. Okay, that's all for our Q&A. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.